What's going on, fellow developers? My name is Tyler Potts, and in today's video we're going to be implementing Google one-tap passwordless authentication in a full stack application. We will be building a login page with a Google one-tap embed that will show you all your logged in Google accounts where you can select an account to log in with. That will take you to your authenticated or private pages. In this video, you'll learn how to use Vue.js with Vue 3's composition API and Vue Router. You'll also learn how to use Node.js as the backend application using Express. And finally, we'll be using Stytch's Google one-tap OAuth SDK to create a full stack passwordless application. Stytch is an authentication platform for developers that has multiple passwordless solutions such as magic links, SMS passcodes, OAuth logging, and much more. You can find out more about Stytch via the links in the description. And without wasting any more time, let's build this application. Okay guys, so the first thing you're going to want to do is come over to stytch.com and head over to login on the side. Yours should say login here. I'm already logged in, so it says dashboard. So if I click in here, once you've logged in, you should come to this page. You'll see a guide along with some other things. But here you'll see we have user management. This is where all our users will be. We have our redirect URL, so we're going to have to add in some where after we've authenticated, where does it then redirect us to, and OAuth along with our API keys and our project settings. So the first thing we need to go to is our redirect URLs. Now we need to add in two different redirect URLs. So I'm just going to click, or two set of the same URL, but for two different things. So we're going to say HTTP, and we're going to add in our service. Basically the server we're going to create using Node, we're going to add in the details for that. So we're going to say local host, and we're going to say 5,000. I'm then going to select this for login and sign up and hit set as default. If I hit confirm, as you can see, that's going to create two redirect URLs for us there. So once we have set up our redirect URLs, we need to go into OAuth and set up our OAuth. Now you can see here, my Google is, when I click into OAuth and click on Google, you're going to see mine is actually set up. But I'm going to show you how you can basically set this up yourself. So when you come to here and you click in, you're going to have this this thing. It will come up here saying, setting up Google OAuth, first Stytch redirect URL, copy and paste URL into your Google project. Now we don't currently have a Google project, so we need to go and create one. So if you head over to console.cloud.google.com and sign in with your Google account, you will come to a page similar to this. And now we need to either select a project or create a new one. So I'm going to create a new project up here. You can see new project. I'm going to hit click. And now we've got to give it a name. So I'm just going to call this the Stytch GTAP because it's just a kind of relevant name. And I don't currently need an organization. So I'm just going to hit no organization there and hit create. And that's going to generate our project for us. So now that's generated, you can see here, we can select that project and it will show up here. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to click here to go to APIs overview to bring me to console.cloud.google.com/APIs/dashboard. And then it's going to show all this. So here we are, this is our overview. And what we need to do is go to our OAuth consent screen. Okay guys, so once we're on the OAuth consent screen, I'm going to click external, create. And then I'm going to give it a name. I'm just going to say Stytch app or Stytch GTAP, anything you want to call it here, whatever your app's going to be called. I'm going to select tylerpottsdev@gmail.com for my user support email. And then I'm going to scroll down to authorized domain and I'm going to put stytch.com in here. And then the developer email addresses, I'm once again going to use my own email address in here. And I'm going to hit save and continue. On the next screen, it's going to give us scopes. We could just hit save and continue again, and the same for our test users. Now on this page, I can actually scroll down and just click back to dashboard, and that's going to bring us here. Now we could publish this app if we wanted to, but we're currently in testing mode, and that will work fine for what we want to test. So let's go into our credentials, which is the next part, and we actually need to generate a OAuth 2.0 client ID. So at the top here, click create credentials and click OAuth client ID. Now in here, we're going to select web application and give it a name. I'm just going to leave it as web client 1. You can name it whatever you want. So underneath authorized JavaScript origins, we're going to add in HTTP localhost and also HTTP localhost 3000. That's going to give us access to our, or allow it to use our local host. We're then going to also go under authorized URIs, and we're going to actually go back to the Google login Stytch bit we were just on and copy this URL. We're going to paste that in there and click create. It's going to give you a client ID. Copy this and go back to the Stytch page. Click next. It's going to here tell you about the redirect URLs. We've already done that, so we can click next. And we can paste in our URLs here. So you can see I've added in a new URL and then copy our secret and also paste it in here. So you can view your secret just like that to make sure it's the right one, which it is. Hit hide and then click next. Once we're on this one, we're actually done. We can test this by clicking on this link, but it's not actually going to redirect us correctly. Once we click this, it's actually going to get an error because localhost 5000 doesn't currently exist. So we could just hit close. Then we can hit finish. And if we scroll down, you can see this is now set up on this page. And if we click OK here, this is now set up as well. So we are now done with both the credentials and also the Stytch login here. So I've opened a blank folder inside of Visual Studio Code. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the terminal by clicking Control and apostrophe. I'm going to clear this and then I'm going to run npm create fight at latest, and I'm going to create this under the name client. So hit enter, and that's going to create a folder called client, which we're going to select Vue for the framework, Vue for the variant, and there you go. That's now set up. So we can cd into client and run npm install to install our dependencies. Once our dependencies have installed, I'm going to cd backwards out of that back into the root directory, and what I'm going to do is run. Well, I'm actually going to make a directory called server. And as you can see, that's created this server folder here. I'm just going to quickly create a file called server.js in here. Close that for now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cd into that folder and I'm going to run npm init-y to generate a package.json file. So now you can see that's been generated here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run npm I and we're going to install express stitch.env and then hit enter, and that's going to basically install the dependencies we need. Once that's done, you'll see them inside of our dependencies folder here. We're then going to run one more, say npm I -d, capital D, to say def dependencies, and then I'm going to say nodemon because that's going to allow us to rerun our server every time we save a file. So now that's installed, you can see here it says def dependency. So I'm going to clear this and we can close this for now. Up the top here where it says scripts, I'm going to rename the start script to def and I'm going to say nodemon server.js, and that's going to allow us to actually set up our server. So we're going to now start writing the code for our server. So the server is going to handle the authentication side of our application. So once we make a request to Stytch to say, hey, we want to log in, Stytch is then going to say, hey, server, this guy's logged in, it's successful or it's errored. Basically, can you tell them that and log them in for us? And then our server's going to be like, yeah, sure, man. And that's how it's going to work. That's how all relationships work in coding. So we're going to start off by getting Express from the Express module we installed. We're then going to go get our Stytch and set that equal to a Stytch, which we also got installed. Once we've got that, we're going to say app is equal to Express to start our application. And then finally, we're just going to require .env and run .config to actually set up a .env config file. So inside of our server, we're going to create a new file called .env, and this is where we're actually going to set up our environment variable. So in here, we're going to have port, which I'm going to set equal to 5000. We're then going to have Stytch _PID, which is going to stand for Stytch project ID. And we can go get this by going back to here, going under API keys and clicking project API. Now we're going to copy that and paste it in here. We're then going to get a Stytch _secret, and we can also get that from here. Now, if you don't have a key here, you can click create a new key, or if you want to create a new key, you can actually delete this one just like this, and then hit create new key, and that's now generated a new key. So I'm going to click copy, and then I can paste that in here. So don't use my key because this will be deleted by the time you guys come to watch this video, but it's just there to show you how you actually do it. We're then going to go Stytch, and we're going to say underscore env, which we're going to set to test. And you can set this to whatever you want, but I explain why soon. So let's just close that. Now underneath the .env config, we're going to say const client is equal to a new Stytch.client, which we're going to then pass through an object. Now in the object, we're actually going to pass through our project ID, which we're going to get from process.env.Stytch_PID. We're then going to get our secret, which is going to be equal to process.env.StitchSecret. Just zoom in one here for you as well. And then underneath here, we're going to set our env, which is our environment. So are we running in a live environment or in a test environment? So what we want to do is say process.env.Stytch_env. And we're going to see if it's equal to test. If it's equal to test, we're going to say Stytch.envs. And then we have two options, either test or live. So if it's equal to test, then we're going to make sure we're using a test environment. Else, we're going to say Stytch.envs.live. Now, you may be wondering what I've just done. It is called a ternary operator. Usually, it sits like this in one line, but I break it down underneath to make it look a bit cleaner because I don't like it sat in one long line, especially when I'm doing a tutorial because it's harder to read. Now, that's the end of our setup here. So we're going to now set up some middleware. Express uses middleware to basically do things before you actually make contact with the server. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to say express.json to allow our Express server to accept JSON as a header type. We're then going to say app.use, and we're actually going to set up a course parsing system here, because otherwise our server will not allow us to set up basically. And what we're going to do is we're basically just going to say this: rest.header is equal to access control origin from anywhere, although you can lock this down to, let's say, a domain localhost 3000. You could then pass through another one and so forth, but we're going to allow it to all for now. If you put this in a live environment, I suggest changing this to the correct origins. And then we're going to allow these headers here and go next. So what next does it say is, okay, once we've done this, now you can render whatever you want to render. So we're going to set up our first route, and our first route is going to be a get route. So when we make a get request to the node server of localhost 5000, we're then going to say /auth. So if we go to /auth, we can then say asynchronously, we're going to create a request and response, and we're going to pass that into a arrow function. We're then going to say const, and we're going to get the token. Now this is actually going to be passed from Stytch. We're not going to ever have to call this route because Stytch is going to do this for us. It's going to call this route, and that's why in our redirect URLs we set up localhost. I've actually noticed I've done something wrong here, and this shouldn't be localhost 5000. It should be localhost 5000 /auth. So if we delete both of these, we can then reset up these URLs and we can do it correctly. So I apologize for doing that wrong. So we can say 5000 /auth. We're then going to select login and sign up, set as default, and hit confirm. There you go. Now that's the correct redirect URL. So that's going to redirect us to our auth and sign us in. And we're going to set this equal to rec.query because this is going to be passed through as a query string to our application. We're then going to try to get a response from our client.oauth. So this is now contacting Stytch. We're saying, hey Stytch, can you check if the token we would just given exists? And then if it does, we're going to start a session. So we're going to say management type is going to be equal to Stytch because we want Stytch to manage the sessions. We're then going to set the session duration minutes equal to 5 for testing purposes. So this is how long you'll stay logged in for. So you're only going to stay logged in for 5 minutes, but you could set this to 60 minutes or even, let's say, multiple days. You could say, we could say this minutes are 60 times 24 times 7. That would be 7 days. But for now, we're going to set it to 5, which is the lowest we can possibly set it, because we're going to want to test being able to lose our session. I'm then going to say rest.redirect, and we're going to redirect to http localhost 3000 question session underscore token, and we're going to set that equal to our response dot session dot Stytch underscore session dot session underscore token. Now that's quite long-winded, so we're going to take this out and we're going to create a new const called session underscore token and set that equal to that. We're then going to pass session token inside of this redirect here, and then we're going to catch an error. So if this doesn't work, if any of this fails, we're then going to catch the error and say res.status 400, meaning there's an error, and then we're going to pass back JSON, which we're going to say success is equal to false, meaning there's an error. The message will be error authenticating, and then we're just going to say pass the error through as well so we can actually see what that is. Now that is all we need to do for this auth route here. So what we're doing is we're going to get the token once we get redirected after using Google to log in. Stytch is going to redirect us to this route here. We're then going to get the token it sends back to us, and we're going to ask Stytch if it's a correct token. So if this token is correct, then it's not wrong. We'll authenticate and we'll start a session which will last 5 minutes. We're then going to get our token and pass that back to our front end to say, hey, store this session token so you can always know when you're logged in. But one thing we're going to need to do is verify these tokens. So even though I'm passing a token to our front end, people can fake this token to our front end. So what we need to do is have our front end send a request to our back end saying, hey, I have this session token, can you verify me? And that's what we do. This time we're going to create a post request, and this is going to say /verify. I'm then going to pass through just rec and res and set this as a arrow function. And this time we're going to get a token again, but this time it's going to be equal to rec.body because this is a post request and we're going to be passing a body through our application. We're then going to do a try and catch again, and we're just going to say await. Sorry, this needs to be asynchronous as well. So I've got to say async before the arrow function, and I'm going to say await client.sessions.authenticate, and then we're going to pass through a session token called token, which is the token we're passing through. And if this doesn't throw an error in our catch, then that means this has worked and we'll authenticate. So what we're going to do is we're going to say res.status 200.json, and we're going to basically just say success is equal to true, and the message is going to say successfully authenticated, or it could just say session verified. Any message you want to pass back to your front end to display on the front end will appear here. So in our catch, we're going to say res.status 400.json, and we'll basically just going to say success is equal to false. The message is going to be error authenticating. And finally, we're just going to pass the error back so we actually can see what the error was, if we do get an error, so we can debug it. And that is all we need to do for the verify route. The last thing we're going to need to do is I'm going to create a const called port, and I'm just going to set that equal to process.env.port, or if that doesn't exist, we're going to set it to 5000 by default. Anyway, we're going to say app.listen, and I'm going to say port, and then we're going to do an arrow function here, which just says console.log server listening on port, so we know the server is working. So let's just see if we can run this server now. So in our package.json, we created this def script here, which said no mod server. So we need to call this. So inside of our terminal, we're going to say npm run def, and that's going to just run our server. Now, as you can see, it says server listening on port 5000, which is perfect. I'm just going to stop that server and actually close this for now, but that's everything we need to do with our server. Actually, we're going to leave our server running. I'm going to say npm run, oh, that's not how you do it. I'm going to say npm run def, and I'm just going to leave that running in the background so we know that works. I'm also going to open a new terminal and cd into client so we can run that server when we need to. I'm just going to close this and close our server.js. We don't need this folder anymore, so I'm just going to hide it. And now I'm going to go in client under source, and I'm going to delete the components. I'm going to delete the assets. I'm going to go to main.js, and what I want to do is I want to actually export or install a new module. So I'm going to say npm install. I'm just going to close this sidebar so we have more room here. npm install, and I'm going to say Vue-toast-notification, just like that. And this is going to allow us to show little messages which come back from our server. So I'm just going to hit enter, and that's going to install that. So now in our file here, underneath the app import, we're going to say import Vue toast from, and we can say Vue toast notification. We're then going to import the styling by going to import the Vue toast notification /dist/theme-sugar. Now, after our create app, well, before our create, we want to actually set this to a variable called VM, which just is going to stand for our Vue instance here. And I'm going to say .use, and now we're going to say use Vue toast. Now, this will allow us to say vm.toast and then create a toast, depending on what we want to do. Under here, we're going to export default VM just so we can actually access this from another app, another script. Now we also want to install Tailwind. So to install Tailwind, the first thing I want to do is say npm install Tailwind CSS post CSS, and we're going to put at latest on all of these so it gets us the latest version. And finally, I'm just going to say auto prefixer at latest as well, and hit enter. That's going to install Tailwind, post CSS, and auto prefixer for us so we can actually use Tailwind styling in our application. Once they are done, what I'm going to do is run npx Tailwind CSS and say init, and I'm going to say -p because the -p is going to also create a config for our post CSS. So we're going to create a config for our Tailwind CSS and our post.css. Hit enter, and that should generate the two config files. You can see here we have a tailwind.config and a post.config. Inside the Tailwind config, we need to go and get some different content here. So I'm going to go back to the browser, and I'm going to type in here fight. And I'm going to go to tailwindcss.com/docs/guides/feet. And down here, you can see the steps we've just taken to actually install this here. But we're going to actually get in this module here, go back and replace this with that, because this is going to target our Vue and JS files and also our index.html to say if we're using classes, only includes those classes in these files. We then want to go in our source and create a new file called main.css, and I'm going to say at Tailwind base. We're then going to say at Tailwind components, and finally we just want to say at Tailwind utilities. Hit save, go back to our main.js, and then import that CSS in here. So I'm going to say /main.css, just like that. We then want to import our router, so we're going to say router from /router. However, our router doesn't exist yet, so we need to create it. But first, I'm going to go after our create app and say .use, and we're going to use the router straight away. We also then need to install our Vue router by going down into our thing and saying npm I Vue-router, hit enter, and that's going to install Vue router for us. I'm then going to clear this, go back into our source, right click, create a new folder, call it router, and then create a new file and say index.js. Let me just save this file here so it's all set. Close this sidebar and close this for now and go in our index.js. So the first thing we want to do inside of our router is just import the router. So we're going to say create router, and we're also going to get create web history from Vue router. We're then going to import our home route, or actually we don't even need to import our home route, we need to import VM from /main. So this is what we exported from here to be able to use our Vue toast. So we're going to actually export that into this file. We're then going to say const roots is going to be equal to an array of objects, and then going to start off with /name home, and the component is going to be equal to Vue's home. So let's go and create this component. So inside of our source folder, let's create a new folder called Vues. Inside there, let's create home.vue, and also, well, let's also just create a quick template in here, which is just going to have a h1 that says home for now. And then in our views, create a new file called login.vue, which is going to be our unauthenticated route, or our public facing route, which is going to say template, which has a h1 again of login for now, but we'll change these later. Let's close both of these, go into our route, and then underneath our component here, we're going to create a meta. And in our meta, we're going to say requires auth, and we're going to set that to true. The reason we're doing this is just to tell our application that this is going to be some metadata that we're going to use later. This doesn't actually do anything necessarily in Vue, but we're going to write some codes to handle this ourselves, to say this is a page that is private that you can only get to if you're logged in. So we're going to create a new route here, and the second route is going to be path /login. We're then going to give it the name of login, and we're going to get the component of Vue's login. So now we've set up our routes. What we want to do is actually create the router. So I'm going to say const router is going to be equal to create router, and we're going to pass through the history of create web history. And then we're going to pass through our routes, just like that. So this is going to set up our router to actually use Vue routes. And then underneath this, we want to just say export default router. Now that will actually work, and this should all work fine. So let's just quickly test this. So if we go in here and say npm run def, hit enter, this should then create us a server. Oh, we have an error straight away. So what's the error? Components hello world. So if I go to this app.vue, you can see here this is actually needs editing and changing. So we're going to delete this import script here. I'm going to delete two things in here, and what I'm going to do is write in, I'm going to do .app. I'm going to create a div with the class of app, and then inside of here I'm going to say router-vue, and that's going to set up our router in here. I'm then just going to add some default stylings inside the style. I'm going to have a body which says @apply, and we're going to use Tailwind here to say background gray 800, and also text white. I'm then just going to set a link class, so we have one there to use, and I'm going to say apply text emerald, and I'm going to say 400 because it's a brighter emerald. We can say underline, and finally I'm just going to give it a cursor of pointer by default. And that's all we need to do for our app.vue. If we now scroll down and rerun this client, it should now work, which looks like it does. Let's go to a URL here. So let's just say localhost 3000, and hopefully this now says home. And if we go to /login, you can see it now says login, which is perfect. The issue is we don't want to be able to go to home because we're not currently logged in. So how do we stop that? Well, I'm going to show you. We're going to go back to our router. We're going to close this app and our Tailwind config, also our main.js. I'm going to close the side panel, and back inside of our index.js in our router folder, we're going to go after the router, and we're going to set a method which basically stops us from going to a route if we're not logged in. So I'm going to say router.before each. And in here, we're going to have an asynchronous call, which is going to have a to, a from, and a next. So this means where we're going to, where we're coming from, and what's next. So inside this, we're going to say if to.query, because we're going to pass a query, and we're going to say session_token. So if we've sent a session token from anywhere, we're basically going to go to our local storage and we're going to say set item, and we're basically just going to say our session token, and we're going to say that's equal to to.query.session token. So when our backend redirects us back to our application, it's going to say, hey, here's a session token to have so you can actually log in. We're then going to say router.replace, and what we're going to do here is say query. We'll replace our query with null because we want to hide the token from the browser because it looks kind of ugly. I'm then going to say const token and set that equal to local storage.getIM token, and if that doesn't exist, we're just going to get back null. So we're then going to check for a authenticated route. So if we're going to a route that you need to be logged into, we're going to say matched.sum, and then we're going to get the record, and we're going to say record.meta. So we're going to now start using this metadata we added in here, and we're going to check if it requires auth. So if it requires authentication, we're going to check if we have a token. If we have a token, then we're going to check, we want to check if it's verified. Else, if we don't have a token, we're going to go to next/login, and it's going to redirect us there. Also, at the bottom of this, I'm just going to run next at the bottom just so we know that if any of this fails or none of this is true, it's just going to go straight onto the next page. So to verify our token, what we want to do is actually make a call to our server. So we're going to say response is equal to await, and that's why we set a sync up here. And we're going to say fetch, and we're going to say HTTP localhost 5000/verify. So if you remember, we created a verify route in our server, which we're now going to use. We're then going to set our method to be a post. We're going to have headers, what's going to be equal to content type, and it's going to be application JSON. And then under here, we're actually going to pass through our body of JSON stringify and an object of token. So what we're going to do here is just say our session token we've got, we're going to send that to our server. So if our token exists and it's not equal to null, we're going to send it to our server and ask it to be verified. So we're going to say if not response.success. So if there's an error, we're going to say local storage remove item session token, because it means our session token is wrong. We're going to say $toast, and this is why we added the toast to the start, and we're going to say error, and I'm just going to say something went wrong, please try again. Once we've done that, I'm going to say next/login, and then I'm just going to return. So what next login does is basically redirect us back to the login page. So anything you pass to next, you can either pass nothing, which will carry on going to the current requested item, the to, or you could pass through a new route to redirect it to somewhere else. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to say, okay, because we're not logged in, we want to go to the login page. But we also need to check if we're logged in and we're on the login page already. So we're going to say else if to.matched.sum, and we're going to check if the record is, the record arrow function, and the record.name is equal to login. Because if we're on the login page, we want to check if we have a token. And if we do, we want to basically do the same thing we did up here. But instead of doing all of this inside of if it's not successful, we want to check if it's successful, and if it is successful, we want to redirect us back to the home page. Oh, we also need to say then res.json, res.json on both this response and the previous one, which will then allow us to actually get our data back in JSON format so we can actually check if it's successful or not. Otherwise, it'll throw an error. And that way, so what we're doing here, we're saying, okay, so to get a session token if someone sent a session token. If we're on a page that requires auth, or if we're trying to go to a page that requires auth, then we're going to make a request to our server and say, hey, we need to verify us to make sure we're actually got a correct token and we're not just trying to fake our login. We're then going to say response.success is equal to local storage.remove item session token. Because here, if it fails, if we're not actually logged in, we want to remove the session token we stored, else it's going to keep trying to log in again. And I've just messed up that. There we go. And then we want to make a toast to say, okay, there's an error. Let's go say next login. We're then going to say if we don't have a token, we're going to redirect to the login page. Or if we're on the login page, but we are already logged in, then we're going to go back to the normal page. Otherwise, if none of these match, then we're just going to continue on going to the next page because that means everything is working fine. So if we go back here now, you can see we're on the login page. And if we try to go to the home page, we automatically get redirected back to the login page, which means it's now working. Now we can try and fake a request here. So we go to network. You can see there's been no requests made. So if we go to our application and go into our local storage and local host, let's just delete these tokens. These are actually separate tokens for other things. And in here, I can say session underscore token and set in, let's say, a random token name. And now if we refresh, you can see it's come back to login here. But if we go to our home page, you can see it's like something went wrong. If we go back to our network tab, you can see it tried to make a request and it says error authenticating because that token is invalid. You can say it says invalid session token format is invalid session token, meaning the token we entered was fake and it's redirected, which means it's all working perfectly. And also, this also means our server is working as well, which is great. So now we've done this, we need to set our login page to actually handle our login, or, well, to handle, so we can actually log into the app using the Google's one tap ability. So what we want to do on here is we want to, let's start off by removing this and let's create a main. Now on the main, we're going to have a class. We're going to be using Tailwind style this, of course. I'm going to zoom in one more time just so you can see a bit better. And we're going to call this login. I'm going to say min height and I'm going to say screen. I'm going to say background gradient to bottom right, from green 500 to cyan 400. Inside of here, I'm just going to create a section with the class of container. And then we're also going to have MX Auto to center it, along with the padding top of 16 to push it down a little, padding bottom of 4 and padding X of 4 as well, to give it a bit of padding around the edges. I'm then going to add a H1, which I'm going to say password-less login, or actually we're going to change this to G-tap login, G-tap login. I think it sounds really cool. We're going to say class is equal to, and we're going to say text 4XL, MB8, we'll have it text centered along with font of black and uppercase. And finally, underneath the H1, we're going to have a div with the class of background gray 700, a max width of MD, which is 448 pixels. We're going to have it MX Auto to center it again. We're going to make the edges rounded. I'm actually going to do rounded large. And then we're going to say padding 4. And there you go. Now inside of here, I'm going to create a div with the ID of G-tap. And now what we're going to do here, we're going to use Stytch's client API or SDK to allow us to actually inject the code we need in here. So what I'm going to do is say setup. And underneath setup, or at the start of setup, sorry, we're going to import the load Stytch function from Stytch. So we're going to say load Stytch, and we're going to say from at Stytch /Stytch-JS to let it know we're using the JavaScript version and not the React version. There's actually a built-in dedicated React component you can use from Stytch, but their documentation is on their website and it's really good for the React stuff. So if you want to check it out, definitely go look at that. Otherwise, we're going to be using just the standard JavaScript implementation of it, and then we're going to get on mounted from Vue.js. We're then going to say const setup is equal to an asynchronous function, which we're going to say const Stytch is equal to await, and we're going to say load Stytch. So we're going to get our Stytch from the load Stytch event, which is basically just going to return us all the code we need inside of this Stytch variable here. And then we're going to create a new Stytch instance where we're going to say Stytch, and now we need to pass through our public key. So the public key is actually something anyone can see. So if we go back to our Stytch.com dashboard and go to our API keys, at the very bottom you'll see our public tokens. Now I'm going to copy this token, I'm going to enter it inside of this, and then I'm going to say .mount and then pass through an object. Just zoom out one just so you can read this, so it's a bit split up there. Now under mount, what we're going to do is we're going to say element ID, and we're going to pass through the element we want to attach to. So this is going to be the GTAP here, because we want it to mount the Stytch GTAP or the Google sign-in to our GTAP element. We're then going to pass through login or sign up view, and we're going to pass through an object here. And then we're going to pass through the products. Now the products can be multiple things, but this is what we're going to be using. So we can say OAuth. You can also say magic links and a bunch of other stuff inside of here, but we're just going to use the OAuth product for now because we're using the only option we're going to have is the Google One Tap. And once we've set up the products, we're then going to set up the OAuth options, which is going to be another object which says providers. Now you can pass a bunch of different providers in here. So if you head over to stytch.com/dashboard/OAuth, you can see all the providers Stytch has to offer, such as Google, Microsoft, Apple, GitHub, and Facebook. But we also have Slack, which is coming soon, which is pretty awesome. If we then head to home and click on, well, any of these for now, because we're going to use this to get to the docs page, where we can click on SDKs. And then we can go into JavaScript SDK and go down to OAuth. So here you can see how you can actually configure your OAuth. And this is actually currently what we're doing. And as you can see here, we have the OAuth options here. You can see here the options it actually gives you, such as Microsoft, Apple, GitHub, and Facebook. But you can also see Google is slightly different because of its one-tap capabilities. So if we scroll up here, you can see it actually gives us a little config here, which we can actually take. So if we copy this, we can actually take it into our code and paste it. Copy, go back in here and pass the provider in here. We can then also set the position instead of floating to be embedded, and that will allow it to be in line with our application just like we've actually set up. So underneath login or sign up view, we're going to add in style, and I just want one element called width, and we'll set this to calc. It's going to be 100% minus 20 pixels, because for some reason the Google form here likes to have an extra 20 pixels over the 100% mark, and I'm not 100% sure why, so we're just going to add 20 pixels to counteract that. Now under this set, we can say on mounted setup, or we could just pass through an arrow function here, which I prefer to do, and say setup like this because it looks a bit neater. And then that is all we need to do for this page. If we go back and we go back to our Vue app, if we refresh, we have a little error here, failed to resolve Stytch thing from Vue login. Does this file exist? Let's go and find out. Stytch.js, did we install Stytch? I do not think we did. So inside of our client, we need to say npm I, and we need to say Stytch at Stytch /Stytch-JS, and that should install the front end client for us. Now we clear this, npm run def again, allow the server to start, go back and refresh. You can see this is now loaded with our one tap all set up. So let's hit continue aside. Let's open up this so we can see. Let's make sure the network is running so we can see anything that happens. And now let's hit continue with Tyler. So that's going to make a request. It said it's successful. It's now gone to our app and you can see it happened that quickly. You didn't even notice it. So it's now redirected us back to our login page. But what happened in between that is it said, okay, let's now use the redirect URL of localhost 5000. So it went to localhost 5000 and it passed through a token. The token then was sent back to our localhost 3000 with a session token, which will now be stored in our application here. And you can see session token is equal to this token right here. And that's all logged in. So now all we need to do is be able to log out of this application. So for now, how we log out is we can just delete these tokens in here, refresh, and you can see we're back here. And we can log in again, and hopefully it should just work. And there you go. Because if you didn't notice at the top there was a little flash of the actual actual session ID token it's passed through. So we go back to redirect tails and go to user management. You can see our user is now set in and our OAuth provider is Google, meaning we're now signed in with Google. But we need to actually now set up our home to actually, well, so we can log out. So go back to our code, close login, close this, go into our home view, and let's set up a quick, simple template for this, just so it looks decent. Inside this home view, we can just say another main, and then inside the main, we can have a section with container.mx auto and padding of 4. Once we've done that, we could just set up a h1, which will say home. I'm then going to give this also the class of text for Excel, MB8 and text center to center align it. Close that sidebar and zoom in a little here for this one. And then under here, we're going to have a paragraph tag with the class of text gray 500 and also text center. And then in here, we're going to say, welcome to the home page. And we're going to pass through just a span, which has the class of link, which we set up earlier. And we're going to pass the @click event, and we're going to say logout as a function. And I'm just going to say logout ? Now, above the template, I'm going to set up a script with the setup syntax sugar up there. And then in here, I'm going to basically say import, and we're going to say use router from, and we're going to say view-router. We're then going to say const router is equal to use router to actually set the router we're using. And then we're going to create our logout function, which is going to be equal to an arrow function, which all it's going to do is going to go to our local storage dot remove item, and the item it's going to remove is our session underscore token. We're then going to go router dot push, and we're going to push us back to the login page, because this way we've now logged out and we want to redirect ourselves back to the home logout page. So now let's go back here, and you can see we have this login. If we refresh, you can see it's all working fine. Let's hit log out, and there you go. We're now logged out of our application. We can sign back in with Google, which is going to then redirect us, take us back in and log us back in here, which is all perfect. So as you can see, Google One Tap using Stytch's SDK is absolutely dead simple, and it works so easily. Now, I just want to mention one thing. If this isn't appearing for you or there's any errors, one thing you might want to do is enable third-party cookies. Otherwise, it's going to show you just a single link. So if I close this, you're going to see it's going to show you this, which will still work. If I click continue, it's then going to redirect me to Google instead of doing it in there. As you can see, it logged me straight in because I'm only logged into one account. But if I was logged into multiple accounts in my Chrome, it would then show multiple accounts I could select. But as you can see, that worked fine, and now we're logged in. We can then log out again. And if you also click close and now you don't see that element, you can actually head into your application, your cookies, localhost, and find the G state and just delete it. Then if you give this a refresh, you'll see it should now show you the one tap possibility again there, which is absolutely awesome. And just hit continue as Tyler. And once again, we are now going to get logged into our application and it works flawlessly. So that is the power of Stytch, guys. If you want to know more about Stytch, head down to the description below or head over to their website, stytch.com, to find out more about passwordless authentication. They have OAuth, magic links, and also SMS one-time passcodes, as well as session management and a bunch more features here. So definitely go check out Stytch. All the links now will be in the description down below. Okay guys, so that's the end of this video. If you've enjoyed it, do not forget to leave a thumbs up, smash that subscribe button, and leave a comment if you have any questions. If you're new around here, you might not know, but we have a Discord server. The Discord server is a pretty awesome place. There's so many people who talk and help each other out. There's help channels, so if you get stuck on a video and you need to show us some code, hop over to the Discord channel, give us a message, and we'll try and help you as best we can. And if you just want some other developers to hang around with, there's also that there. People will talk and enjoy the time they spend with you. Any questions you want to ask, you can ask there. But anyway guys, thank you for watching this video, and peace out.